It is easy to discount how challenging it is to really manage a business that's in hypergrowth mode. And when I say hypergrowth, kind of 50% would be at the low end. I've been in plenty of businesses that grew over 100% a year. Especially when you get to scale, if you're growing 100%, it's really tough to keep the wheels on, if you will.
Yeah. Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Thank you, Fat Joe, and welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, my guest is Bill Zerella, the CFO of publicly traded auto marketplace ACV Auctions and former CFO of Fitbit. Bill's career has been at the intersection of technology and hypergrowth, and he shares his playbook for taking companies from the private to public markets at scale. More specifically, on this episode, we cover how a CFO thinks about tech debt and reflects changes to R&D investments in the operating plan, managing expectations with the current core team when you bring in more experienced leaders from the outside, how Fitbit was running Quickbooks at $300 million in revenue when he came into the company, that's a record, managing investor and employee expectations when your stock is at a $12 billion valuation, and also when it goes to $2 billion, how fast competitive dynamics can change in the story of going up against the Apple Watch, and why having a broader focus rather than being a sector or business model specialist as a CFO is valuable. Bill has many times over been the guy companies call when they want to go public. He found his product market fit as a CFO for later stage tech firms who want to operate efficiently at scale and in the public eye. I love the stories Bill told about the diversity of business models he's worked on, and how he draws a through line to the value of data and carving out a competitive moat in any company you scale. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into Netsuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. Mercury knows your financial operations are complex. Founders and finance teams have to pull together different tools, reconcile transactions from different sources, and struggle to get accurate answers. With Mercury, you can simplify your operations with banking and software that power your critical financial workflows, all within the one thing every business needs, a bank account. And with new bill pay and accounting capabilities, you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000, ambitious startups that trust Mercury to provide the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows so they can perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I'm getting good at that voice. Bill, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Going through your career, it's a true journey in hypergrowth. And hypergrowth sounds sexy, but people on the outside sometimes fail to realize some of the inherent frictions it causes. I mean, a rising tide lifts all ships. A lot of revenue cures a lot of problems, but there are a lot of headaches. Maybe we could start out by talking about some of the common disconnects or frictions in a company that's growing super fast.
Sure. So my background has been primarily in high growth tech companies. Mm-hmm. So I kind of will respond with that as the context, right? So, most tech companies are led by CEOs who are technology savvy, a lot of engineers, especially in Silicon Valley. So there is a tendency, especially when you're in hyper growth mode, to lean in very much on the technology side of a business, right? And that's usually what drives, disruption in a young tech company's technology advantage and competitive advantage, right? So there tends to be an inherent bias towards that side, but to really scale a business effectively, I think, one of the roles of the CFO is to ensure that there's an understanding, not just by the CEO, but the rest of the executive team, that there needs to be, a very thoughtful approach to capital allocation, because it's not all just about scaling the engineering team, right? To truly scale a company, you need to scale every function. Every functional activity in the business needs to scale. And most CFOs are obviously pretty focused on a lot of the back office stuff, especially IT infrastructure, which can actually prevent a company from scaling effectively. So, what I tend to do is to ensure there's a more balanced approach, especially working with the CEO to understand that, okay, yeah, we need to invest for sure on the technology side to continue to, drive that competitive advantage, but we can't ignore the need to scale every other asset of a business, because it's hard. It's really hard, right? And it scans not just the back office functions, but customer service and support, just the other operational activities in a business. But that's what I always strive for, that balanced approach, with also keeping in mind that there's got to ultimately be a target financial model that the company needs to hit at some point. Because, companies have learned now, especially in the world we live today, that you need to have a path to profitability, and that's typically owned by the CFO.
There's something to be said about the one who discovers the gold mine, usually the CEO who comes up with the tech, and then the person who figures out how to get the most gold out of that gold mine. Yeah.
And look, it is easy to discount how challenging it is to really manage a business that's in hyper-growth mode. And when I say hyper-growth, kind of 50% would be at the low end. I've been in plenty of businesses that grew over 100% a year, especially when you get to scale. If you're growing 100%, it's really tough to keep the wheels on, if you will.
Yeah. What are some of the common disconnects that you think happen with hypergrowth? Is it like, hey, on the customer support side, we literally just can't onboard customers fast enough? Or is it, hey, on the revenue side of the business, like we're not collecting fast enough to pay our bills? What do you see as, like, maybe if you could give 1, 2, or 3 top disconnects in hypergrowth that are common across companies?
Actually, believe it or not, one of the biggest disconnects is because hypergrowth companies hire people really quickly, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges is establishing company culture and maintaining that, because typically you're hiring so many people so quickly that people bring in and import the cultures that they've previously came from, right? So it's really important to have a clear articulation of kind of what the vision and mission of the company is, and what the cultural side of a business is, which a lot of people underestimate, right? But you want to try to create cohesiveness in terms of all your employees and get them all aligned. And when you got people coming in from, all these different companies, at any point in time, if you're going from a few hundred people to a few thousand people, you're going to have just a conglomeration of different cultural values, and you want to try to create some cohesiveness and connectivity between all the people in the company, right? And that's hard to do, because everybody comes to a company with their own ideas as to how to do things, and you want to try to overcome that. So it's harder than most people might think. That's actually because at the end of the day, the way I think about it, CJ, is a company is just an accumulation of people, right?
Yeah.
People run a business. People create technology. People create success, right? So it's a matter of creating that cohesiveness among all of your teammates, which is harder the faster you're growing.
And when you're trying to onboard talent as fast as possible to keep up with the traction you're seeing in the market, you often go back to the well of the people that you knew from other companies. So what I've seen in hypergrowth is that you end up actually importing the old culture from a place you've already been. And the new people are like, a lot of them know each other. But the people who've kind of been the OGs, the one who've been there for a while, they're like, whoa, what is this? It's kind of like a wave of a culture that's adopted from somewhere else.
Oh yeah, yeah, and people, people have been there from the beginning. By the way, may have some bad habits as a result of, just kind of the way that startups kind of operate at the beginning, right? So you got to battle that a bit too.
Someone once said to me that being a CFO in hypergrowth is just a series of uncomfortable conversations because you're having to point out things that are breaking or aren't going well or people that aren't scaling with the business. I don't know if you think there's any credence in that.
Listen, again, when you're in that kind of mode, that growth mode, things break all the time. And you have to bring in, which is another really critical area of importance in terms of success, you have to, bring in the right level of experience to make sure you have the right leadership in place. And people tend to get promoted to levels that they can't handle, if a company is outgrowing them, so to speak, right? So if you're I'll just take the finance and accounting organization. If you're a corporate controller of a $20 million company, and that company is now doing 200 million on its way to 2 billion, you may not have the skill set and experience to be able to operate at that level, right? So sometimes you got to make tough decisions in terms of, bringing in different leadership to support the company's, growth objectives.
That's always been the hardest part, in my opinion, because the people that got you here aren't necessarily going to get you there. But at the same time, like I've never, taken a business from say 0 to 5 million on my own. So I have so much respect for what they've done. So yes, that's always an uncomfortable dynamic because yes, those people have done something incredible, something that I can't, stand up credibly and say I've done. But at the same time, you've seen this movie before and what happens if you don't kind of shift people into other roles and up level it.
Yeah. And it's particularly been the case with companies that I've joined because in the last 20 years, I've joined primarily late stage pre-IPO companies,
right,
where the next stop was an IPO, right? And, I've learned that I really need to have a team in place that can support not just where the company is today, but where it's going to be in the next 3, 4, 5 years. So what I learned years ago was the need to overhire. And that typically means my team being out of larger public companies because they know what it needs to look like as the company gets bigger. And that can be tough because you have people, to your point, that helped you get to where you were. And that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have a role in the business. It's just in a different capacity.
How do you manage like the expectations of somebody coming in? Because I've seen overhiring go the wrong way where you hire someone who's like a Ferrari and you really only needed a Cadillac to run it day to day, or what I call you hiring an iPad leader or a laptop leader, which is a stupid saying, but it's like, is this person going to actually be fingers in the keyboard to help you solve stuff and roll up their sleeves, or are they just going to check like their email on their iPad or iPhone and just send out directives to people, which also isn't scalable sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, what I have found is that, finding people out of companies that are larger but not too large, okay, and finding people who've had experiences in smaller businesses.
Okay, so
they
they
can
have
sort of
been
bridge the gap,
smaller,
right?
Yeah.
So I don't think I've ever hired someone out of a $10 billion revenue company, right? Because that's just a totally different environment, totally different culture, totally different level of bureaucracy. And they probably have a really big team underneath them. And don't want to kind of get their hands dirty, right? So you're sort of looking for someone who's willing to do both, but has that experience in a large enough business that they know what they need to build, right? Because it's all about when you're growing really fast, you're building out the company's infrastructure, you're building out your teams, you're building out systems, you're building out policies and processes, right? You're just constantly building things to be able to support the bigger business and as it matures. So you sort of have to have some sense as to what you are building.
Yeah.
So ideally, the best people I have found is people who have done that in bigger companies, but not too big. And people have had maybe ideally some experience in a smaller business and they know what it's like to kind of bootstrap yourself and you have to get your hands dirty and into the details sometimes.
Yeah. So we talked about the employee component to it. We talked a little bit about working with a CEO during hypergrowth, but how does the CFO manage board dynamics, Bill, when investors see traction and want to keep putting cash in?
Yeah, that's never been an issue that I've encountered, frankly. I will tell you that, my experience has taught me that when investors want to give you money,
Yeah.
assuming it's a reasonable valuation, don't turn it away because you never know when you're going to need that cash.
Okay. Say more about that.
Yeah. Actually, I was on the verge of doing that once earlier, much earlier in my career. This is probably over 20 years ago. And I was debating whether or not to take the money. And we did. And I'm glad we did.
Okay.
Because there were some rough times ahead that, you can't anticipate, right? You never know when you're going to need liquidity. So the best rule that I live by as a CFO is you can never have too much cash. Okay.
Hypergrowth commonly leads to tech debt as well. And you had an incredible quote that I read somewhere that tech debt is cholesterol in the arteries of startup growth, the overhead associated with previous shortcuts being taken in software development, which increasingly impede future scalability efforts. How does the CFO play a role in understanding tech debt? Because I'm not a technical person, but I kind of know when something is broken or not working, or we should refresh something. Can you speak to tech debt?
Yeah, sure. And by the way, every fast-growing technology business has tech debt. I've learned that over time. There are literally no exceptions, at least no exceptions that I've seen. So the way you understand it, well, first you just have to have a general awareness of what I just said, that if you're in a tech company that's in hypergrowth mode and there's no tech debt, then you have found like a unicorn, okay? Because it's so rare because it's really, really hard, when a company is smaller and growing fast to kind of build out your technology infrastructure that can scale from, again, 20 million to 2 billion. It's just really hard to do, okay? And typically you're moving too fast to be able to spend the time to build that capability out. And you typically also don't have the money to do that and the resources. So you have to understand there's going to be tech debt. Understanding the extent of the tech debt, what I have found is the only way to truly try to understand it is to really spend time with engineering leadership and try to get as true a representation as to, okay, how much of a hole are we in? And as we double and triple and quadruple and 10x our business, or what level of reinvestment is required to ensure that our systems are scalable at those levels versus where they are today. Like, when do things break? And when they break, what is it going to cost to fix this, right? Or are we going to have to re-engineer a bunch of stuff? Because that's typically what you have to do. So you try to understand as best you can what that investment might be, and then you have to bake it into your financial model. Because at some point, you're going to have to write out that check, okay? And you've got to be prepared to fund it, basically. Or you've got to be prepared to reallocate priorities and maybe pause some of the things on your roadmap that you otherwise want to do. In fact, I believe, since I spent most of my last 25 years in Silicon Valley, I believe that's what happened at LinkedIn. I think they had so much tech debt that they had to actually pause new development.
Wow.
In order to re-engineer a lot of their back-end, platforms, right? And I wasn't there, so I don't know for sure, but that's what several people told me. So, yeah, you have to, and again, as a CFO, you have to understand what the level of investment is that's required to address tech debt. And I've dealt with it at every company that I've been in.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Quick math, the less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to Netsuite by Oracle. Netsuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With Netsuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. And back by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, you know your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please do it, guys. I really need this. Cash is king. As the CFO of a SaaS company, I know firsthand how important it is to maintain a healthy AR balance. If you can't effectively manage cash, you can't service debt, make payroll, or invest in growing your business. That's why I'm so excited to partner with the sponsor of today's episode, Maxio, the leading billing and financial operations platform for B2B SaaS. Maxio helps top SaaS companies like Chili Piper, Crunchbase, and Stack Overflow get cash in the door faster by automating collections and dunning. Gone are the days of manually chasing down invoices. Join the 2,500 plus subscription businesses using Maxio, formerly SaaS Optics and Chargeify, to eliminate revenue leakage and streamline order to cash. It's never been easier to get paid. Visit maxio.com/run the numbers to supercharge your financial operations in 2024. Not only does requesting a demo using the Run the Numbers link help support this podcast, ya boy, you also receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. Woo! That's maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Do you have any rules of thumb, like when you look at a longer term forecast, Bill, in the R&D line, like, hey, out of the 100%, I think this percentage should be for just maintaining, keeping the lights on for the platform or tech. This percentage should be for enhancing it with features, and like this percentage should be for innovation. Like, how do you start to break up the amount of spend for R&D should go to like the past, present, and future?
Yes, I think it's different in every company.
Yeah.
The challenge is, and this sort of gets back to tech debt, right? The more tech debt you have, the more of your resources are required just to keep the lights on, right? And it makes it that much more difficult to, for example, add new features because you haven't built the infrastructure in a way that makes it really easy, right? So most companies ideally want to spend a lot of their resources on innovation, but what gets in the way is, again, keeping the lights on, and just doing basic blocking and tackling to try to keep up with the business growth, right?
Yeah.
So you do find an imbalance, but over time, I think as companies get more mature and more scalable, then you can allocate more of your resources to the innovation side.
I want to switch gears a bit and talk about the story of Fitbit, where you were CFO. And so zooming in on a period of time in your career, first question I got to ask, is it true that Fitbit was still running on Quickbooks at $300 million in revenue when you joined?
Yeah, so I joined Fitbit. It was the early spring of 2014. And in 2013, the company did $300 million in revenue and was running on Quickbooks. And when I got there in the early spring of 2014, the company was in the process of migrating onto Netsuite. And to my knowledge, we were the largest company in the United States that was running QuickBooks, which I don't take any credit for because it was before my time.
That's a world record, though.
I think it is. And what's even more impressive is that, this was a hardware business. This wasn't a software company, right? Now, we didn't manufacture our products. They were manufactured in Asia. But you still need to do a lot of tracking within your financial systems, right? Even though you're not manufacturing the equipment, you got to track all of your inventory levels, et cetera, right? So I don't know how the team there did it. The prior VP of finance there, who was just a really smart gal who I'm still friends with, just did a phenomenal job, right? And when I got there, we were still in transition, getting onto NetSuite. so it was pretty amazing journey.
Yeah. Shout out to NetSuite, sponsor of the pod. So Fitbit grew to $1 billion on $22 million of invested capital. That's unprecedented for a consumer tech product company. Like you said, Bill, like they had a lot of hardware. How is that possible? And how did you craft that plan as a CFO to deliberately reinvest in the business?
Yeah, it is pretty incredible looking back. So there were a number of factors driving that. So first, again, the company didn't manufacture its own equipment. We used CMs in Asia. So we didn't have that upfront cost of, running a factory, so to speak, which would have been, in a different place, right? And most companies, especially consumer tech companies, do not manufacture, their own equipment these days, right?
That's a dirty secret. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's, there are some exceptions, right? But by and large, most companies will outsource manufacturing, right? Because that's really not where your key value add is. Your key value add is, the engineering side and kind of
Yeah.
the design of the products. And so anyway, so that was the model. So I would say that there were a few different factors that came into play. So the first was, as best as possible, really managing the ramping of the supply chain to be consistent with the growth in demand, right? So if you overbuild, then you're going to have a bunch of inventory that you got to pay for that hasn't been sold yet. And that's an enormous drain on working capital. So we had monthly build plan meetings, which included the entire senior executive team, plus the supply chain team, to methodically project out demand based on input from all of our channel partners. Because we were selling into about 50,000 different locations around the world. Wow. It was through channels, right? We had Fitbit.com that we took orders, but that was about 10% of our business. The other 90% was through channels. So first, trying to really hone that process to, as best as possible, predict demand based on lead times for the factories in Asia. Okay. The second was, and this was a really important key, was negotiating favorable payment terms with our CMs. So we typically were getting paid on average from our channel partners in a time frame that allowed us to use those funds to pay our CMs, because we had delayed payment terms with our CMs. And we had one primary CM that took the lion's share of our business. So those extended payment terms gave us enough time to collect money on the other side from the channel, because we were basically having product shipped directly to our channel partners. And at the time, Fitbit was growing so fast, we couldn't actually manufacture fast enough to meet demand, right? So the year before I joined, the company did 300 million. That was 2013. 2014, we did over 700 million. In 2015, we did $1.9 billion. Okay.
Wow.
So we were feeding, this enormous level of demand, but those credit terms made a big difference. So that was number two. Number three, we did leverage lines of credit with banks, working capital lines of credit. So that allowed us to finance some of the working capital requirements. And lastly, we just had a, maniacal focus on managing our cost structure. Okay. And I have that pretty much at every company. We were, let's see, I'm trying to remember. So in 2014, we did 50 million in EBITDA. In 2015, when we went public, we did 400 million in EBITDA.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So there were a lot of things that had to come together, but it was a team effort, right? Because some of the stuff was happening before I got there, obviously. But I would say just the leadership of the company was, including the CEO and his co-founder, and the gal who was VP of Finance, were very, very focused on cash flow management. And then when I joined, we just sort of, continued that effort and turbocharged it a bit, because the growth really started taking off in a big way.
Can you speak to the significance of the cash conversion cycle? It sounds like you were a ninja here.
Yeah, look, especially for hardware businesses, it's really critical, because when you're dealing with working capital consumption for a hardware company, it can be pretty overbearing, especially if you're growing really, really fast. As an aside, the company that I'm at now, ACV Auctions, we actually have a negative working capital cycle. We actually have marketplace float at any point in time, because we get paid from buyers before we pay sellers. So, it gives us a negative working capital cycle, which is the opposite, which is great, right?
Yeah.
But for hardware businesses, if you're growing really rapidly and you're not attentive to some of the things that I just mentioned, you can easily get buried with an enormous liquidity issue if you're not careful, right? So for us, it just happened to be that this, stars in the moon aligned at Fitbit, and we were able to get through that. And when I got there, the company had raised a total of $63 million, if I remember correctly. And the most recent round was about 40 million. And that 40 million was still in the bank when we went public.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Negative float, negative working capital seems to be like nirvana. In a lot of ways, it kind of illustrates a power dynamic in these vendor relationships. How difficult in your experience is it to get to that state? Is that something that it takes years to get to, and you have to get to a certain point of scale in order to exert that power?
Well, look, this is the first time I've encountered this in my career, right? So
there are very few companies that have negative cash conversion cycles.
Yeah, I mean, there's other ways to get there. Right? If you're a SaaS business and you're selling multi-year contracts and have enough leverage to get payment streams up front, especially a year up front, maybe even longer. If you give them attractive terms, then you could potentially generate positive cash flow and not be from a P&L standpoint profitable yet, right? So it all depends the business. I think Amazon, I don't know about today, but I remember years ago, I think they had a negative working capital cycle.
Yeah, Amazon and Walmart and Costco are all famous for having really good cycles.
Yeah, so I haven't had the benefit of living in that kind of world until recently.
Yeah,
so I was always been on the other end of that, but yeah. So there are examples, and if you can get to a business model that gives you that, it gives you that kind of negative working capital cycle, that's kind of a godsend in terms of financing a business, especially if it's fast growth.
Yeah, there are some publicly traded auto companies that I won't say by name, but apparently, like, they won't actually pay the manufacturer until the part is sold off the shelf. So that's a pretty good scenario to be in.
Yeah, automotive companies are experts in managing cash flow.
They are net 365-day payment terms. Bill, what was the big shift in competitive dynamics when you were at Fitbit, and what did you learn from it? Because if I remember correctly, Nike, Jawbone, Apple Watch, they all kind of came into that territory around the same time frame.
So there are two categories, right? So I'll differentiate between fitness trackers and smartwatches. Right?
Okay.
But Jawbone had a fitness tracker. Nike had a fitness tracker. Nike never got any traction at all, which was pretty amazing considering the brand, right? Jawbone just had a lot of fits and starts, had a lot of quality issues. But, what we were able to do successfully at Fitbit was create a lot of simplicity in terms of the user experience. Consumers typically can't handle, complexity. And you get a little jaded in your viewpoints on this when you're in Silicon Valley, right? Because you're just surrounded by technology. So most people are, technology savvy, right? Even if you're not an engineer, and I'm not an engineer, right? But you're sort of around enough technology that you sort of, grab onto things, right? So clearly one of the keys for us was the usability and simplicity of our products. The other huge advantage that we had was innovation. And when we invented 24/7 heart rate detection, that was groundbreaking technology. No one in the history of the planet ever was able to monitor heart rate 24/7, right? And part of that was also having an operating system, an OS, that was very power efficient. So if you remember, back those days, and still today, and I still wear a Fitbit smartwatch now, you could wear your Fitbit 24/7, and it would go 5 days before you needed another charge. And I would typically take my Fitbit off, every morning when I went in the shower. I just put it in the charger, and by the time I'm out of the shower and dressed and ready to go, I put it back on, and that's all. That was the only time I ever charged it, right? So those were all key benefits that allowed us to win, and ultimately we were able to, Jawbone actually went out of business. We had a lot of litigation between us, and we won every lawsuit. They went out of business. Nike withdrew from the space. But at that time, we also understood that smartwatches probably were where the wearable space was going to go, because there were multifunction devices, and therefore you could use it for other things, right?
Yeah.
So we knew the market was going to go that way. And actually, when we went public, Apple already introduced the Apple Watch, but it really wasn't gaining much traction. So we were trying as quickly as we could to build the capability to actually deliver a smartwatch to market. And the reality is we ultimately did, but by that point in time, Apple started taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Apple, right? It's kind of hard to debate, the brand power and the following that Apple has, right? And they were very successful, and we had kind of our share of issues that started cropping up, right? We had some quality issues on our own, and we just couldn't get a smartwatch to market that was competitive enough to keep us kind of growing, right? So the learnings there were never underestimate any competition, for sure, which is a good lesson to learn anyway, no matter what business you're in. But, especially try to be as forward thinking as you can in terms of what your competitors are going to do, right? Now, in our case, we sort of knew where it was going. We just couldn't move quick enough because building a smartwatch was orders of magnitude more complex than a fitness tracker. We ended up buying Pebble, if you remember them. We bought a payments platform, and we ultimately had our own third party ecosystem that we got through Pebble. We got their software platform, so it accelerated our entry into the market from a smartwatch perspective, but it just wasn't fast enough when you consider where we were up against with Apple. The other lesson, and this is the other takeaway, right? So our business was growing so fast we could barely keep up with demand. So when you're in that position, it sucks all the oxygen out of the room because everybody at the executive level is just trying to keep the wheels on, right? I was interested in understanding how do we diversify our revenue streams, okay?
Right.
And we did some of that, but we didn't do that fast enough either. As best you can, have a diversified, streams of revenue. Just like diversification of a stock portfolio, right? Certain stocks are going up, and maybe at that time you have some counter-cyclical stocks that are going down, or the other way around. Diversification of revenue streams helps a business overcome some challenges in a particular line of business that you have, right? Depending upon how diversified you are. So in our case, we ended up being focused on creating freemium models where we can create kind of recurring revenue streams on a subscription basis, which the company has now. So that was the other takeaway is as fast as you can have a diversified set of revenue streams. The challenge is trying to maintain your focus at the same time.
Yeah. Bill, when people write books about competitive wars or competitive dynamics, they always seem to capture it like it was this one-time event that just happened and poof. Like now the landscape is different than it was before. When you look back on kind of the war with Apple at Fitbit, was that like, did it ramp over time? Was it over multiple years, or did it kind of feel like you woke up one morning and the dynamics changed?
So if you remember back then, the Apple Watch when it was introduced really didn't get much traction.
Yeah.
At all, which is a bit surprising, right? So, we went public in 2015. We had a very successful year. Again, we did $1.9 billion. In 2016, through the first 9 months of the year, we were growing 50%. So we were on track for $3 billion in revenue, and actually, our internal models were getting us to about $800 million of EBITDA. So doubling EBITDA on 50% revenue growth. We had, if I remember, we had 3 new products that we were introducing during the holidays. So in that business, just like any other consumer business, 40% of our revenue was in Q4, right? Because the holidays were driving.
And how much of that was in December?
Yeah, a lot. Well, in our case, it was since we were shipping product to the channel, right? We're shipping in advance, right? So I don't remember exactly, but November was a really big month. October as well, because you're basically getting the channel to stock up, right, to meet demand during the holidays. And back then, a lot of people were buying Fitbits as gifts, right? So that quarter, for whatever the reason was, the Apple Watch just took off. And we had a terrible quarter, okay? And so it was almost overnight, right? We thought we had enough in terms of new product innovation to kind of keep us going a little longer while we were working on our smartwatch, right?
Yeah.
And we had an initial smartwatch that was kind of crude. It's the Fitbit Blaze, which actually sold pretty well, but it was not an Apple Watch. And we weren't trying to replicate Apple, right? Because, actually at the time we thought there were way too many apps anyway that people weren't going to use, right? But we still needed something more competitive. And that was almost overnight. It was that one quarter that we took a huge hit. Apple Watch just kind of took off from there. And again, it's Apple, right? So,
right. It's a hard train to stop.
Yeah. It was impossible to stop, right? And, we had to do a lot of restructuring. We had to take a lot of costs out. We had to kind of, change our strategy a bit. And, ultimately the company produces a pretty decent smartwatch today.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The company's part of Google now, so I'm not privy to the numbers. None of us know, right? But, so it was pretty sudden. Again, we kind of knew it was coming. It just came really quickly.
Do you remember preparing for that earnings call? Like what your mindset was, what you were looking over in your notes, just kind of getting into the head of somebody there?
I really don't remember. I mean, we had our Q3 earnings call. It would have been in early November. We were pretty optimistic at that point in time.
Yeah.
Right. Not knowing how the quarter was going to turn out. Right. So
okay.
We felt pretty good only because of the new products we were delivering. And, we were getting positive input from what I remember from the channel. Right. And, things changed pretty drastically, obviously.
Yeah.
After that.
And as a CFO, you have to manage the stock price when it's up or down. You had some incredibly lucrative times. Fitbit, I think, got to like a $10 billion market cap. And then you also have to manage expectations and the story when it goes down. I think it fell to $2 billion in market cap. What was your general philosophy on how stock price and valuation impacts your mindset?
Yeah. So actually we peaked at a $12 billion market cap.
12. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so it was good while it lasted. Okay, listen, when your stock is going up, your employees are happy, your investors are happy, your board's happy, everybody's happy, right? Because everybody's making money. The opposite happens when your stock is going down and taking a huge hit. So it is really tough to manage through that. So the biggest issue you've got is employee retention, right? Because employees see their equity positions take a huge hit. And this happened at a time that there was still enormous demand for talent in Silicon Valley, right? So, attrition was a huge issue for us. We got a bit creative in terms of how we were granting, future equity, trying to give people more shares or more, we would shorten vesting periods. So we were doing a lot of creative stuff to help us keep as much of our top talent as possible. Mm-hmm. But it is really, really hard because you're also cutting costs because there's a reason why your stock is going down, right? Because you're not hitting your revenue targets and your EBITDA targets. But, but you're also dealing with, investors and shareholders who are not all that happy for obvious reasons, right? So none of those meetings are fun. So it's just not a fun time, and it's something you have to do your best to power through. You also got to worry about liquidity, which, we took a big hit and, fortunately we had a lot of cash in the bank. I think we went into that quarter, if I remember, with about 800 million in the bank. So for us, based on the size of our business, it was a pretty big cash cushion and we needed it. But it's really tough. You could try to keep people engaged and excited and you try to kind of set the path and the vision going forward for how the company's going to recover. And then you do your best to execute, right? But it's not easy.
Yeah. I'm guessing there's somewhat of a tension internally where you want to be coach positive and rally everybody up, but you also want to treat people like adults and tell them the reality of the situation.
Yeah, listen, people are smart. They can see, right?
Yes.
When you're a public company, right? So they can see your stock price. They know what your revenues are. There's no mystery in terms of what's going on, right?
Yeah.
But you do have to do your best to rally people and keep them excited as best you can in terms of where you're headed and what are you going to do differently to drive the company towards success.
Yeah, it was a good story and a great run there. And I've been looking at all the companies that you've worked at, and there seems to be some through line here. You've worked B2B, B2C, and more specifically within the health and auto industries. Mm-hmm. What's the commonality between them all? Because from the outside, somebody may say, wow, he has a diverse experience between all of these. Is there a characteristic of all of them that they share?
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, there is. So a number of these companies were very data-driven businesses. So Fitbit was all about getting biometric data, right? And it was data that was not available to any of us before, right? I talked about 24/7 heart rate detection, but also sleep stages and a lot of other things that you could never see, right? So heart rate variability and other metrics. So that was a very data-driven concept, right? I left Fitbit after a little over 4 years, and I sort of departed from the late stage pre-IPO companies because I done enough of those for a while. So I thought I would just kind of roll some dice and join an early stage company in the autonomous vehicle space.
Yeah.
And a company, Luminar, that ultimately went public after I left via SPAC. Their stock's taken a lot of hits, but I think ultimately they're going to be a very, very successful company because they have a big order book. But that was using something called LiDAR technology, which is lasers. It's basically bouncing light off of objects down the road that allows a car to see, right? Mm-hmm. And this tech is so incredible and it's advanced since I left the company. When I was there, we could see a tire at night about a football field away, which a human couldn't see. Now I understand they can see 2 football fields away, right? So why is that important? It's also we would create, without getting too much into the technology, we'd create something called a point cloud that basically allowed the creation of kind of a picture of the world around you through lasers, right? And it's all data points, right?
Yeah.
Now, in that case, so Fitbit was all about helping people take control of their own health. Okay. Luminar is about saving people's lives. And if you go on their website, Austin, the CEO and founder, their goal is to save 100 million lives, right? Because that technology will ultimately allow dramatic reduction in deadly accidents. Okay. In terms of safety, everybody talks about robotaxis, right? Which that will come some point, but I think it's pretty far down the road. But Luminar focuses on safety and saving people's lives, but it's all data driven. So there was commonality there. All right. ACV, which is also in the automotive space. And, I love cars, by the way. So I'm kind of a sports car enthusiast. So that kind of plays a role as well. But, ACV is all about creating a data set on a used car that, creates so much transparency that a buyer, and this is dealer to dealer wholesale transactions, that a buyer can buy that car online, sight unseen. And it's all about creating a data set, mm-hmm. right? So there is some commonality there, very different businesses that you might not link to each other.
Right.
But they're all data driven. I mean, we're using a lot of generative AI and machine learning in what we do to basically determine the condition of a car. We scan the undercarriage. We can listen to the engine and run algorithms and know if there's issues with it. We plug into the electronics and run a bunch of algorithms there. So it's all tech driven. So that's the commonality. Again, very different businesses, but they're all driven by data. And arguably today, more and more companies are driven by data, right? Especially with everything going on with AI.
Data is the through line. I like it.
Yeah.
And how would you advise younger people, maybe like myself? So I'm a CFO at an earlier stage marketplace company serving the automotive industry. Before that, I was in cybersecurity. But would you say to try to become an expert kind of in one either business model or sector, or would you say to chase kind of your curiosity and the opportunities?
Yeah, so I think, look, there are pros and cons of being like focused on a particular industry. The pro is you become highly experienced and expert in that industry. The con is that's probably where you're going to spend your career. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I think having a broader focus, especially as a finance person, a CFO, is beneficial because most CFO related skills are transferable, right? Mm-hmm. So I elected very early in my career to just be focused on technology businesses, which is very broad because there are so many different kinds of technology businesses, right? hardware companies, software companies, and everything in between, right? So I think having a broader focus is an advantage, because it opens you up to more alternative opportunities as you advance your career, right? So
Okay.
I can join any technology company. It doesn't matter what the technology is, because I'm not an engineer. I'm not building the products. I just need to understand the dynamics of scaling a technology business, right? And being exposed to different business models helps as well. Most people don't know that at Fitbit, we had a enterprise SaaS business that was, when I was there, was approaching 100 million in revenue.
I had no idea.
Yeah, which, if it was standalone, you'd get some attention, right?
Yeah.
But it was 100 million, buried inside a $2 billion revenue business, right? So it was kind of not front and center as much, right? Didn't drive our P&L. But, I've been exposed to a lot of different kinds of business models, from hardware businesses to software businesses to SaaS businesses, now the ACV marketplace business. So I think the more diversity of experiences you've got, the more you learn, right? The more you can kind of take learnings from one business and apply it to another business. It just makes you that much more versatile, right? Think about a utility player on a baseball team, right?
Right.
You can play multiple positions now. Not that, the analogy maybe is not perfect. You're not going to be in multiple, other executive roles. If you're a CFO, you're a CFO, but you can apply those learnings, from different businesses and be that much more of a value add in whatever company you're at.
That's great advice, because sometimes I look at myself and I say, in 10 years, maybe I'm still working here, but also is the idea that you want to be the go-to marketplace CFO, is the idea you want to be the go-to auto CFO, is the idea that you want to be a utility player that's, I'll jump in and I'll apply learnings from a business model that you may not thought had a commonality. So I don't know. I guess there are different paths you can take.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's a lot of, listen, I have a playbook that I follow, when I join a company. It doesn't matter what the business model is. Okay. It doesn't matter what industry or what vertical within technology the company is, right? When you're managing costs, when you're managing, the ramping of talent, when you're building IT systems, there's just a lot of commonality.
Yeah.
Right.
Those things are the same everywhere, and you know what good looks like. That's awesome. Bill, what I'm going to do is take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So The first question I ask every CFO is, what's something you've screwed up in your career before?
Okay. So, and we've all made mistakes. So I'll give you a little context first. So, my family and I moved to Silicon Valley in 1997, right? So it was when the internet was just taking off and all those things. And I joined a startup for the first time in my career, because that's what you did when you moved to Silicon Valley. I ended up moving to work with a guy who's a CEO of a startup that I knew I worked with previously. And I did several early stage startups. And at that point, I realized that, okay, I'm not smart enough to pick the early stage startup that's going to be really successful, because the venture capitalists who invest in these companies don't know.
It's actually a really good point.
Yeah, they think everyone's going to be a home run, otherwise they wouldn't invest. And I get that model. But the venture capital model is one in which you have one or two companies in a fund that literally carry the fund. Right?
Yeah. Power law.
You have one, the funds that had Google or Facebook, right? That's all they needed to be a home run. Okay. So they have, one, maybe two, if they're lucky, home runs in a fund, maybe three, if they're really good. And then a bunch of, singles, doubles, triples, right? And a bunch that just literally fail, right? So, it took me a while, but I figured out after 3 startups that, okay, I'm not smart enough to be successful here. So I pivoted my career to late stage pre-IPO companies, right? And sought to develop 2 things. 2, a skill set to scale those businesses, okay? And secondly, to kind of broaden my span of control and, more than just the guy running finance and accounting, right?
Right.
And I ultimately have had every function report to me except for sales and marketing and engineering, from legal, HR, IT, corp dev, actually operations, in a couple of companies. So I wanted to do that because I felt not only would it make me, more valuable or be able to add more value, but also kind of make my life more interesting versus just looking at the numbers, understanding like what's beyond that, right? So the first time I tried that, didn't work out too well. Okay. Right. And I learned a lot. What I learned more than anything else was when a company's growing really fast, and I referenced this before, you need to overhire. I needed to overhire. The team that I built was not strong enough. Okay. I needed to be thinking 3, 4 years, 5 years down the road. Okay. The company's small today. It's growing fast. I got to have a team that knows how to build what we're going to be in 3 or 4 or 5 years. Right. And I didn't do that. And I haven't made that mistake since.
Thanks. That was awesome. Awesome advice. Maybe a bit more of advice. If you could tell your younger self something, knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
I would have told myself to move to Silicon Valley 20 years earlier. Okay. Yeah. Silicon Valley is the center of the universe for technology businesses. Was back then and still is today. I would have, I think I would have probably gotten further along in my career faster if I was there earlier.
So you think where you are geographically when you're younger impacts the trajectory of your career?
It certainly did back then. I mean, today we're sort of in a different world. I mean, I'm a Naples, Florida resident. I go back to my house in Silicon Valley in the summertime, and I work for a company in New York, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm on Zoom calls most of the day, right? Yeah. Rather than being up there for earnings calls, board meetings, QBRs, that sort of stuff, right? So maybe it's not quite as important, but when you're younger, I think it is actually, a lot more people are going back into offices, not in every case, but, being geographically close to to the kind of nerve center of a business, the headquarters, I think is important, even in today's world where you can be more remote, So that's just my thinking.
Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools are you using to get the job done today?
Yeah, so we're running NetSuite. We use Adaptive Insights for FP&A. We work with Workiva for SEC filings, Concur for expense reporting. We use Tableau for data analytics. So those are some of the kind of important systems that we're using. There's a bunch of other applications, the whole litany of things.
What's the most recent tool you bought?
Actually, it's from a relatively young company that our largest VC investor, who still owns an equity position in ACV, even though we went public 3 years ago, and the partner from this VC is the chairman of our board. He kind of tied me into a startup that they're funding called Vertice, VERTICE. I guess I'm giving them some free advertising that helps companies manage their SaaS renewals. We just started working with them a few months ago. So kind of, a little too early to say, but they will kind of use their data sets and their experience to help you ensure that you're getting the best deal, from SaaS companies, because there's so many SaaS applications out there these days that you're constantly trying to manage the renewals, right?
Yeah. We've heard of Vertice. We've heard of the vendors in the space, the Tropics. Maybe Vertice will sponsor this pod. So shout out to Vertice. Bill, last question for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen somebody try to expense in all your years?
Oh, I actually had 2 situations. One was a VP of marketing of a company that I was at, and one was at a VP of sales at a different company I was at. 2 different companies. Unfortunately, both of those executives masked the cost of a vacation and masked it as a business expense. It's kind of a long story as to how we ultimately discovered what they were doing, but they were both terminated as a result. They lost their jobs because of it.
Do you know where they went?
Do I know where they went? I have no idea. This is a long time ago.
Yeah,
but that was quite egregious. It was thousands of dollars.
That's a bad one to get caught with.
Yeah, one in particular was this particular exec just had this elaborate scheme where he masked all these expenses, and it was sort of a sleuth trying to figure out what he actually did, and it was just crazy. And these guys lost their jobs, which was unfortunate. But yeah, that was way over the top versus anything else I've seen.
That's a good one. We haven't had that one yet. Bill, this has been a blast. I've learned so much personally. I just want to thank you for your time, and I know the listeners really appreciate you coming on the show.
Sure. Pleasure to do it.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.